Good evening, and welcome back to our fifth night together for the COVID-19 and the Future of New York conference, sponsored as always by Thinkers Anonymous. We are now a few moments past the halfway point of our symposium, which started back in April and will finish at the end of this month. I'm your host, Kirk Tatnall, and each week we continue to explore a new area of interest, something that defines our city and how the pandemic has shaken it. We seek honest, perhaps unpleasant assessments from our guests, who are the leading experts in their fields. But we love this town, and we will continue to look for the light ahead based on what are the critical ingredients that make New York so special. Last Tuesday, we spoke with Catherine Wild, the president and CEO of the Partnership for New York City, on how businesses will return. We heard about the immense amount of cooperation which will be required between our business leaders and government officials to make that happen. We heard about the ascension of digital and how the pandemic drove that sector 10 years ahead of schedule. And we heard about the city residents who will need to be retrained to compete in the marketplace. How New York responds to its businesses and its residents is critical to the topic at hand tonight: real estate. We now have a record 24 million square feet of office space available for sublease in Manhattan alone, more than during the Great Recession. 40% of the businesses in the Bronx closed, and city rents have dropped more than 20% since we were first introduced to COVID-19. Scarcity births obsession, and New York real estate has always carried its own mania. But now, the demand for the tight spaces we share seem to be less of an issue. In fact, they appear to be a liability. Half of the workforce does not want to return to the office. You don't have to walk a block to see the vacant stores. And last year, over 300,000 people left the city, more than the population of Cincinnati. Many will never return. By all appearances, we are overbuilt, and regardless of whether or not Mayor de Blasio declares we will be fully reopened by July, the emptiness around us tells us otherwise. We have two people joining us tonight to help make sense of it all. Once again, my wonderful wife, Renee Tatnall, will be fielding your questions via the Q&A function. You can send your questions in throughout the night. We will get to as many of them as possible. And our special guest this evening is the chairman of America's Research and senior economic advisor for CBRE, the largest commercial real estate firm in the world. He is their chief spokesman and can be seen regularly on CNBC, Bloomberg, and Fox Business, and hosts the podcast, The Weekly Take. He has a quarter century of experience in commercial real estate. He has combined his knowledge as a lawyer, investment banker, and capital markets expert to address the country's leading universities and business and real estate organizations. Tonight, we have the privilege of him addressing you. Ladies and gentlemen, Spencer Levy.
Thank you, Kirk. And one of the things that Kirk mentioned in my opening, his introduction of me, is that I host the Weekly Take, which is a podcast for CBRE, and I'm very fortunate to host it. And my guest last week was Sam Zell, a very well-known real estate investor. And I asked Sam about the future of New York. He said, well, Spence, I'm almost 80 years old, and I've heard about the death of New York for about 8 different times. And every time it seems to come back stronger than it did before. That is my message today. New York has been down before, and it's coming back stronger than ever. Now, the question is, how much time is it going to take? What will be the damage in its wake? What's going to get us there? Well, let me start with this. The commercial real estate industry right now is going through a transition period. Acceleration of change is a phrase you hear a lot. Distortion is one of my favorite phrases. And what are these accelerations of change that you're hearing about, and which of them are durable? Well, from a macro level, as Kirk mentioned at the beginning, we're seeing a movement of people out of New York, out of California, out of places that are expensive to places that are less expensive, out of places that have questionable weather to places that have better weather. Is this durable? What does it mean for the future of New York and California? Well, what it means is there's going to be less people in places like New York, California, San Francisco, But what does it mean from a overall perspective? That's where you got to dig deeper. And when I say dig deeper, you got to look at demographics. You cannot look at them in the aggregate. You have to take a look at demographics in the micro sense of who's leaving and who's coming. And you know what our study shows, CBRE study shows that yes, you are going to see a net outflow of people. We were quoted in the New York Times last week about the U.S. Postal Service's studies. But what you're going to get an inflow of over the next several years indefinitely are the most highly educated, most highly talented, most highly productive people. That is true for New York, San Francisco, LA, Chicago, Boston, you name it. So aggregate outflow, aggregate inflow of the most talented people so that you're going to compete and beat many of the new kids on the block. And the new kids on the block, you know who they are: Nashville, Denver, Austin. I'm in Denver right now. But the point is that Austin, Texas. Anybody know what the population of Austin, Texas is? It's about 900,000 people. Anybody know what the population is in the New York metropolitan area? If you took not just the city, but around it, it's around 30 million. Not only are you going to have the most talented people, you're going to have a lot of them. You're also going to have the most diverse people, as New York is the most diverse place on earth. One of my great colleagues, Mary Ann Ty, talks about how you can go somewhere in the New York metro area and find people from your home country speaking your language with your culture. And this is really important because notwithstanding New York's strength in terms of its size and its quality of people, we are going to have an outflow. There is a birth dearth nationally. And so we're going to need immigration. And New York's going to be a magnet for that immigration, which will drive its strength moving forward. But let's go from the macro to the micro now. And let's talk about different real estate asset types and how they're going to be impacted in New York City. As Kirk said at the outset, you see evidence of the carnage right there on the street, from vacant retail storefronts to hotel rooms that won't reopen. Based on CBRE's estimate, we think that up to 25,000 rooms in New York City will never reopen in the hotels. And then, of course, you've got the elephant sitting in the corner of every room for real estate conversations, which is just how much demand is going to be sapped by this work from home thing. And that's before we talk about some of the other asset classes as well. But let me just run right to that one, because that's the big question of all: work from home. How much is it going to take you down demand? Well, the short answer is, even though I've read every survey, even though I've written many of them myself, and I've studied every study that's come from Stanford, from Cornell, my alma mater, and elsewhere, none of us really knows the answer. But I believe the answer is much clearer, that the office will come back stronger than people believe, based upon the evidence I've seen, based upon the studies I've read. Well, what's the evidence I see? I was on a call last week with the CEO of Brookfield Properties, and we were talking about his properties over in Seoul, South Korea. And you know what the occupancy of his properties in Seoul, South Korea are? 100% of pre-COVID levels. I was on a call last week with the CEO of Charter Hall, one of the largest Australian land office owners. What are her occupancies in Sydney and Melbourne? 70 to 80% of pre-COVID levels, and almost 90% on mass transit. Now, is Seoul, South Korea a perfect comp for New York? Is Sydney, is Melbourne? No. New York is a place like none other, but it's a place like none other in mostly positive ways, because it's same density that's making it take it on a chin right now is its long-term strength. Density is good. You almost sound nuts saying that today, because it causes, here's my one fancy word of the day, it causes an agglomeration economy, which is irreplaceable. An agglomeration, which is a fancy word that I can't even spell, basically means this: talent, capital, infrastructure, art scene, live, work, play. New York has it all. And that's why you're seeing, notwithstanding all of the challenges laid out by Kirk, you're seeing the big tech firms flood to the city, taking up space, millions of square feet, a lot of it on the west side of Manhattan. And that's going to continue, because they're going to tap into the talent, the infrastructure, the density, the agglomeration effect, which will not go away. Now, yeah, it's going to take a while for New York to come back. It's going to take longer for New York to come back than it's going to come back in Charlotte and Raleigh and Tampa and Orlando. But it's going to come back. And what is it going to look like when it comes back? more people are going to be in the offices than you think, not just because the evidence of Seoul, South Korea, and Melbourne and Sydney. It's because of a study that just came out 3 weeks ago by KPMG. And what did that study show? Well, KPMG's done a very nice job of studying work from home trends for the last year. And if you took a look at KPMG's study in August of 2020, your conclusion would probably be pretty close to the end of the world. But if you read the exact same study by KPMG in March of 2020, same people polled, same CEOs, night and day different. A lot more optimistic about people coming back to the office. In the one poll, they said 70% of them were thinking about downsizing. That fell to 17% in the most recent poll. And why is that? Well, I'll tell you why that is. Because I'm a big music fan. And as a big music fan, I think of music analogies for a lot of these things. And I think about a band that I liked when I was a kid. And that band was called Asia. And they had a song that was called The Heat of the Moment. And what was that song about? In the heat of the moment, you make bad decisions. And you know when the heat of the moment was? Last August. You know when the heat of the moment is almost over? Today, when new opinions are coming out. So I will mention one other rock and roll band while we're on this theme. In the 1970s, there was a band called The Who. They were called the noisiest band in the world, or the loudest band. Why do I mention them? Because I'm seeing the noisiest data I've ever seen in my career, and I've been in this business for 25 years. And if people reach conclusions of the death of New York or the death of San Francisco, I think they're jumping the gun because they don't see the broader picture about what makes cities great over the long term. Now, do we have problems in the near term? Unfortunately, we do. And these problems are starting with retail. And the retail problem isn't a problem as much of retail demand being sapped by e-commerce, as much as it's a capital markets problem. People overpaid for these buildings and they can't meet the market in terms of market rents. That's why the storefronts are dark. You say, oh, well, $700 a foot is still pretty good. Well, if you underwrote 1,000 and you go to 700, you probably got to hand the keys back to the bank. And that is something most developers don't want to do. But that will work itself out because the demand will return. I already know it's returning because I look at multifamily or apartment rents and occupancies in Manhattan. Manhattan had a record December and it's continuing now. Concessions are dropping. Rents are rising. Manhattan is healing. And come September, when people are back in the office, doggone it, more people are coming back than you think. And yeah, they're going to ride mass transit just like they are in Melbourne, just like they are in Sydney, just like they are in Shanghai. Because once they feel safe, they're coming back to more of a normal use. Now, are you going to see more of a hybrid system where people are going to be working 3.5 versus 4.5 days of work in Manhattan? Yeah. And some of those people are going to live in Westchester and New Jersey and Long Island. Well, yeah. But the hub is still going to be Manhattan. Now, the spokes out in these places are not going to be permanent offices in most cases. Most of it's going to be flex space. It's going to be the WeWorks and the Reguses of the world. Why? Because flex is the number one amenity that all of our large occupiers want. And it's not just going to be in the burbs. It's going to be in the main city too, as people don't want to have as much excess space as they had once before. And that's going to be the fundamental tension between landlords and tenants of how much direct space do they have and how much access to this flex space will they have. But ultimately, they will come back. So a lot of the doom and gloomers out there, they say, oh, this sublet space is a big problem. Well, it is a big problem, but guess what? Sublet space can be pulled off the market just as quickly as it can be put on, and it has always been pulled quickly once crises are over in every prior crisis. So I don't worry as much about that. Do I worry about short-term rent declines? I do. Do I worry about longer term, some form of secular vacancy increase? I do. But I am not in the doom and gloomer category. I think that you're going to see rents bounce back to pre-COVID levels in office in about 3 years. Okay, that's a long time, right? But in the GFC, it was like 5 years. After 9/11, it was closer to 6 years. So the bottom line is we're going to heal faster. And why? Because this ain't a financial crisis. This is a pandemic. And the government pumped so much money into the economy. How much money did they pump into the economy? So much money they pumped into the economy that the average consumer has more money in their pocket today than they did pre-COVID. And that's not to diminish that there are many people that are hurting, the terrible cost in human lives, All that stuff is terrible. But the average consumer has more money and they want to spend it. Now, I'm speaking now directly to my friends who live in Manhattan. And by the way, it is a different world than if you go outside of it. And I am outside of it right now. I am sitting here in Fort Collins, Colorado, an hour and a half north of Manhattan. And I went out to a bar/restaurant last night and it was full. And you know what? Everybody seemed pretty damn happy. Why? Because I'm vaccinated. They were all vaccinated and it was back to normal. Not completely normal. There was still a little bit of separation of seating. But once it's normal, once everybody feels safe again, you're going to party like it's 1999. The second half of this year is going to be the fastest economic spending maybe in U.S. history, so much so that we're going to see U.S. growth this year around 7.5%, next year around 5.5%. Now, did we unleash the beast of inflation because of this? A little bit, but that's okay because inflation is better than deflation. But some of that inflation is impacting our industry, particularly with respect to construction materials and the scarcity of labor. So yeah, there are some jobs that are still being built in Manhattan, but because of this inflation in building materials, scarcity of labor, it's going to self-regulate. Some new construction that might have been planned is now going to be delayed. So that's going to suck some of the excess space off the market. The other thing that's going to bring some of the excess space off the market is de-densification. People want to be spread further out. Well, with the exception of the bar I was at last night, people are going to want to have a little bit more spacing in the office, which will make up for some of the slack caused by people working in the office 3.5 versus 4.5 days a week. Listen, folks, I'm not guessing, except for the fact that we're all guessing. We're all guessing. Nobody knows exactly what it's going to look like until we get back to what is considered to be the new normal come September. But all of the objective signs that I see from what I'm seeing over in South Korea, in Australia, every study I've read or helped write from Cornell, from Stanford, from CBRE, from KPMG, they all point in the same direction. And the direction is that the most highly educated, most productive people are still going to flock to places like Manhattan and San Francisco. And those are the people that drive real estate demand. It's going to take a while for Manhattan to come back. Retail is going to take a particularly long time to come back, but there are going to be government incentives to help them out. Hotels are going to come back. I just went on a mini vacation last week with my wife. We went to New Hope, Pennsylvania, middle of nowhere. The hotel was booked. We went there on a Wednesday and Thursday night because we couldn't get in on Friday and Saturday. That's what it's going to be like in Manhattan once people feel safer once again. It's all about feeling safer. Manhattan will come back, but it will take some time. As I suggested, office rents, about 3 years. There may be some structural vacancy baked into the market so that the vacancy just pre-pandemic was around 8%. You may see it get closer to 9 or 10% on a permanent basis. But nevertheless, all the factors will bring it back. You're going to see lots of conversions. And if you want to know what a conversion looks like, all I say is go down to Wall Street and look up. And every one of those old office buildings is now a condo or multifamily tower. Manhattan is the king of conversions of older product. So let me sum up my comments like this. And then, Kirk, I'm going to open it up to whatever questions you have. Why am I so confident in the future of New York? Well, I'm a New Yorker, so I'm biased, but I'm not biased because I look at every market in the world to try to advise the largest clients in the world on what to buy and where to lease. And all signs point to the one and most important factor of all is talent. And New York has not only the best talent base, it also has the largest talent base. Talent is scarce. Talent's going to be attracted to talent in New York City. And that is why New York will come back, even from a real estate perspective. So Kirk and Renee, fire them at me.
All right. So I'm interested in the term flex space, which sounds like it's malleable. You can do what you want with it. So what is, I could be wrong. I see your eyebrows. I could be wrong on that definition. So what I'm probably the biggest question that I have as far as commercial real estate is concerned is what industries are going to be attracted to New York, particularly new industries. So, we know digital is here, we know media is here, We know health services, other things like that. But what new things are going to come to the fore because of this new space that's going to be available to them?
Well, I'd like to tell you life sciences because that's like the big story. And there is a lot of life sciences stories happening in Manhattan. But life sciences is a relatively small industry, and life sciences can't go into a vacant tower. In the words of one of my colleagues who was on my podcast, it's short, squatty buildings that can be converted. Otherwise, you got to build new. And there's only 140 million square feet of life sciences nationally. So it's just not big enough. So what you are going to see are the best people in a variety of industries led by tech. That's what you're seeing all on the west side of Manhattan, whether it be Google or Facebook or Amazon. But you're also going to see the best law firms. You're going to see the best accounting firms. It's what an agglomeration economy is. The best attracts the best of the other types. And New York will attract the highest quality talent, most productive talent. So it's not just one industry, but I would say it's tech and then eds and meds. Those are the industry. Believe it or not, our number one leasing tenant, I don't know if it was last year with you, probably the year before, was healthcare. It was leasing large blocks of space in traditional office buildings. I remember when I was in the New York City real estate development business, I worked for a gentleman named Steve Witkoff, and we did a building on 866 3rd Avenue. We took a whole block of that building and gave it to Memorial Sloan Kettering, took a whole block of that building, gave it to Courtyard by Marriott, and had the rest of it that was some portion of retail and office. So healthcare and tech.
And who are these new people? Who are these people that are going to be attracted? And I agree with you that we're going to definitely need the immigrant, someone who is coming from overseas to come in and take care of these tech jobs, because that's what is where the demand is. Who are the people leaving the city, and who are the people that are going to be coming? Are they going to be younger? Are they going to be more international? Are they going to be looking for the things that you've been talking about? Are they going to want to settle in Manhattan? I'm very interested in knowing who these new people are that are going to be attracted after COVID-19.
It will skew younger, though they won't all be younger. And new immigrants will be attracted to the city. So there'll be a disproportionate number of immigrants and a disproportionate versus the rest of the country. And a disproportionate number of younger folks. Why? Because who left the city? Now, the younger folks that left the city may have gone into their parents' basement, but they're coming back. It's the people that are middle-aged, that have kids, want to think about school. They may not be coming back to the city to live, but they are going to come back to work. And that's what we're talking about here, folks. They are not the same thing. While live, work, play in the aggregate is good, just because people move to Long Island or New Jersey, they're going to snap back like a rubber band. The people you're talking about, Kirk, are people that have moved to Miami, people that have moved to Tampa, Orlando, Nashville, Denver. Are they going to snap back like a rubber band? Not as resiliently. No, they're not. But the good news is the vast majority of people in the New York metropolitan area that left the city went into one of these close by suburbs.
The super wealthy, the 1% or higher, did they actually sell and leave, or did they, because they can afford multiple homes, keep their penthouse apartments and are playing a wait and see to whether they're going to come back to the city full force?
Well, I can't speak for the ultra wealthy, but I can say that tax policy is a challenge for New York City, as it is for San Francisco, and other places. And that is why you've seen even some Democrats that are saying we're not going to support the infrastructure plan unless the SALT tax deduction is resumed back to where it was before. And for those of you who aren't tax wonks, what the SALT tax deduction is state and local taxes used to be deductible 100% from your federal income. And now it's only $10,000. And $10,000 is real money for most Americans, unless you're ultra wealthy, in which case it's not a lot of money. And so by moving to Florida, you could save yourself a lot of money. So I think the tax issue is significant, and it will be a impediment. However, going back to the agglomeration economy and people wanting to live near people that are highly talented, similar to themselves, you're going to see these people come back. Now, will they pay their taxes? That's a different question, because I think you're still going to see some people who are going to have multiple homes. So the tax question, I think, is probably the number one negative. The number one positive is all the impacts of the agglomeration economy that you simply cannot replicate in Austin, Nashville, or Denver.
Thank you. With the eviction ban in place for residents here, is it conceivable to do something, an eviction ban for stores, mom and pop shops, or is there less care for small businesses? It seems you were saying that these businesses have locked themselves into market rates, and I assume by market rates you mean before the pandemic. So they're paying very high, they're having less people come in. Are there ways that the government can help small businesses that are holding on by a thread stay longer, so that, you know, cherished restaurants and things that we hate to see go can hold on maybe a little bit longer, 3 or 4 months, until things start to pick up again in the fall?
Well, let me be black and white about one very specific issue, which is affordable housing. Okay. I am an enormous advocate for affordable housing, and I can talk about ways in which we can get more affordable housing overnight for free, but we can't. And the reason why we can't isn't because of rent control. It isn't because of eviction moratoriums. It's caused by zoning, otherwise known as NIMBYism, that does not allow you to go vertical in places with any type of wealth, particularly suburbs, but also places in big cities like San Francisco, Manhattan. But that said, putting aside, I just got off my soapbox for a second to your specific question. I don't think that eviction moratoriums are going to last very much longer. Eviction moratoriums are going to probably start to burn off sometime early in 2022. And I don't see them coming into the retail sector. I do see landlords bending over to try to help these tenants, and by shifting their rent in the short term into some form of percentage rent, where something like 10% of their top line goes into rent, which is about a normal number in ordinary times, where health ratios skew between 7 and 15% of your rent. But ultimately, I don't believe in eviction moratoriums once we're out of the pandemic. During the pandemic, I'm actually a fan of them, certainly in the multifamily sector. But in the commercial sector, I think that reasonable landlords and reasonable tenants can come to an agreement on some type of reduced rent, which we've seen for most of it. But then ultimately, and this is not a threat, this is just reality, that if a landlord chooses to get aggressive with a tenant, good luck when you get to bankruptcy court, because the bankruptcy judge is probably going to look at it differently.
Hotels. You said something, I think the number that you said that was most shocking to me was that there will be 25,000 hotel rooms that will never return to New York. However, you also seem very bullish about travel, and you're traveling now, that there's going to be some sort of resurgence in hotels. Are we going to expect that many or that fewer tourists and business travelers? Is it just going to be more a sparser city from people that are coming in and visiting for whatever reason, business or pleasure?
In the short term, less travelers. In the long term, it will exceed its peak of travel into New York within the next 5 years. Okay, we'll get back to pre-COVID levels and then go beyond it by sometime in 2024. And what does that mean for the hotel stock that didn't go out? Higher prices. What does it mean that retail is still in? More shoppers. What does it mean for restaurants that are still here and the new ones? More buyers of $70 steaks. And by the way, I can't wait to buy a $70 steak because I am a big steak guy, and the best steak in the world is in Manhattan. And I can get 10 locations right off the top of my head, and I hope at least 9 of them survive.
Exactly. I'm sure they do. Yeah. So I'm hoping that they're going to survive.
I'll gladly pay $70 for a steak. You know what? I've been going to restaurants. I'm not going to try to pat myself on the back by giving bigger tips to waiters and waitresses. I am, though, right now. I just am, because there's a kumbaya spirit out there among the average consumer. They're going to spend more money. They're going to be more generous, and hopefully that will be yet another spur to move us forward.
Kathy Wild last week spoke on the conversion of office space to residential space and said that's I won't say she said it was a pipe dream, but she made it sound like that was a more outlandish type of idea, because it's hard to get the zoning done and to get the conversion done in the first place. However, you used a word, old, I think, for old office space. Should we be looking at less of the office space in, say, Midtown to convert to apartments, and maybe more ones downtown, the older ones, maybe some in Ladies Mile and in those areas as well? Are those the areas that we're going to see office space convert more to residential than we would in the glass boxes of a corporate Midtown?
Short answer is yes, and it's already happened. You look at Wall Street, and as I said, go to the stock exchange and just look up. Every old office building you see when you look up is now a multifamily or condominium tower. But your prior caller or your prior guest was right. It's really expensive. It's really hard, not just for zoning, but cost. And it takes years. It could take decades to reconvert some of this stock. So the short term is going to be less supply on the market of hotels and maybe more supply of office, but converting it into multifamily or condo, very difficult, very expensive, very time consuming.
There was something from one of your podcasts that I was listening to, and you had a guest on from CBRE actually, and mentioned something that was intriguing, something that we've heard also in these conversations. People are going to want to stay home for work. They're going to want to be close.
Not me.
I'm with you. I'd like to get out of the apartment.
And not people that want to be near the most productive people. My most productive teams are back in the office because they want to be there and people want to be near them. So I love you, Kirk, but I'm disagreeing with your initial statement. People don't want to work from home.
Okay, I think there's some people whose their lifestyles, they may have a newborn, or they may have
sure they're going to work more from home, but wanting to work from home and needing to work from home are different.
Okay, so then maybe my question then, because you do not accept the premise, may not be true, but if I understood correctly, it seemed that there was going to be a concerted effort for businesses, not only chain stores that could open up in the outer boroughs, but perhaps also other industries and other offices that could open up in the other boroughs to be closer to people where they live. Do you see that as a reasonable thing, to think that offices will sprout up in Brooklyn and Queens more so than now, so that people won't have to travel all the way into Manhattan?
I see more flex space coming into places like Brooklyn, into places like Stamford, Connecticut, into places like Massapequa, Long Island, into places like Parsippany, New Jersey. Okay. I grew up in New York, so I know the whole region, but you're not going to see permanent office space pop up in those areas.
Interesting.
And the reason why is that the hub is still going to be the city because of the agglomeration effect I talked about. And I look at, I'm not in my office right now, but I have two screens in my home office at the moment. And my two screens, one of my screens is I see every transaction that happens in the firm. I see every tenant in market in the firm. And when TIMs or tenants in market that are going out into these suburban areas, we are not seeing them take permanent office space. Very few of them are. It's all flex space. So the hub and spoke model is real, but the hub and spoke model does not mean we're going to see headquarters move out to Stanford. You might see more people tapping into Nashville and Denver and Raleigh, and maybe that's the spoke. But I don't see suburban markets seeing a significant amount of more permanent office space. It's going to be more flex.
Got it. Interesting. Thank you. Okay, Rini, why don't we've got some questions here. Why don't we open them up for some questions, and I'll go dark over here.
Sure, Spencer. Actually, you've answered a couple of them that have come through. One was around, mom and pop stores in the city. The other was around taxes, and would that be driving folks out? And another was around affordable housing. If those questions haven't been answered for the audience, please let me know. But my assumption is that Spencer addressed them. So we have two more questions. One is, in Manhattan, what's the percentage of international money that are buying many of these large luxury apartments that are really not available to most people that live in the city? followed up by a couple of other questions. But it seems like, at least in Midtown Manhattan, if we walk around, and was pre-COVID actually, and we look up in our neighborhoods, there's no lights on in a lot of these very expensive towers that have been built.
So the short answer is a lot. Whether it's more than 50%, I couldn't tell you. But what I can tell you is this, is that the lower end of the condominium market in New York City, particularly for new build buildings, is very soft right now. And so I know several people who bought units that would have priced at close to $2,000 a square foot are now buying units at $1,200 a square foot, which is an enormous discount in the $1 million to $2 million range, not in the $20 to $40 million range, which you're referring to right now. So there are deals to be had right now, but those deals are beginning to dry up as people are coming back into the city. But I think you raise a very important point, Renee. When I speak about international, I spoke primarily about international people a moment ago, but I want to talk about international capital, excuse me. And I think that I know that New York is the #1 destination for international capital in the United States, if not the world. And that's enormously important because international capital, international tourism, international students, they go together. They said in Greece, in the movie Greece, we go together. They all work together. It's not random that international capital is coming to New York City to buy stuff. And when I say buy stuff, it's office buildings and Chanel purses. It is the same capital. And they live, work, and play in the same places. So back to your question, a lot of more international capital comes to New York than any place else. And I speak to my top sales professionals every day in New York. And they are backing up the truck to bring more of the capital today. And that has not stopped during the pandemic. And we're going to begin to see more trade soon.
And is that mostly parking money?
No, I don't know. I mean, in the condominium case, maybe, but in the case of buying commercial real estate, it is long-term investment decisions. And some of these are never have to sell, sovereign wealth funds or otherwise.
All right, so I have in that same vein, let me read this question. Are commercial landlords prepared to renegotiate leases in a way that's unfavorable to them monetarily in order to retain their tenants? Or is the incentive structure so screwed up that landlords prefer to have vast swaths of unoccupied space, both from an office and a retail perspective?
Well, let me just tell you how we advise our clients. First of all, every time we advise our client to go into a building, we tell them, well, who is your landlord? It's not whether they are a good person or a bad person. It's whether they are an institution or a multi-generational family office or somebody else who's in it for the longer term. Certain institutions cannot drop the rents because it will then devalue the asset which they plan to dispose of in 3 to 5 years. Intergenerational familial offices, those people may drop the rents because they want the cash flow. So you have to look at the incentives of the owner rather than putting all landlords into one bucket. Those people who are in it for the long term, not selling in the next 3 to 5 years, very well might drop the rents. But people that are selling in the shorter term, you're going to have a much more difficult negotiation.
Okay, thank you. Kirk, I don't have any other questions. Hopefully all questions that were submitted have been answered. If not, ping me again and I'll recast them, but back to you, Kirk.
Well, sort of on that same point, another thing I've been thinking about as far as the retail is concerned is we saw such a homogenous influx of big chain stores. There seemed to be, a Walgreens or CVS on every block. There used to be a Gap all the time. Are we going to see a greater variety of retail, more interesting shops, more shops that people are going to find unique and that are going to be their own little magnets because of how special they are? I've missed that in the 30 years that I've been here in New York. Do you think we're going to see a more interesting city as a result of the way the retail is right now?
First of all, I think you are characterizing New York incorrectly.
Okay.
Because New York is a city of reinvention. And the reinvention was in the meatpacking district. It was in Brooklyn. And the stores that were down there, that are down there, are pretty cool. And they are locally owned, and they are smaller, and they're different, and they're real. And that's what we talk about. The conversation I have with my big landlords is, do you want credit or do you want cool? And it's always a conversation, because of course they want cool, but they want the credit too, because it's fun to have a nice local tenant. Then you got to take it to the bank. And will the bank give you the same loan on that? They won't. So it's always a balance between the two. But New York is reinventing itself in places all the time where the hip, cool retail can come, because the landlords can afford to put it in there. They can't afford to stick it on Fifth Avenue because the rents, what they paid for the building, are too high, right? But if you go to Upper Madison, you will see some of those hip, cool retailers, and you're going to see more of them as some of the more established ones go out. But it brings up a very important point about big cities. So when I talk about New York reinventing itself, I talk about not just the meatpacking district in Brooklyn and the far west side. I talk about the Fulton Market in Chicago. Chicago used to be the Loop. Fulton Market is brand spanking new. It used to be a tough neighborhood. You know who moved there? Google, the headquarters of McDonald's. And there ain't one restaurant there that I've ever heard of, because they're all locally owned and they're hip and they're cool. You know where else I see that? The Wynwood section of Miami, otherwise known to you as where they hold Art Basel. Looks like to me the Third Ward of Milwaukee. Looks like the East Harbor in Baltimore. Looks like the art section of LA. Dude, I do this for a living, man. New York is the master of reinvention, just like these other cities. And that is precisely where these hip, cool retailers are going to go.
I guess what you're saying is I should just get out more.
Yes, you should see reinvention in those neighborhoods. And I can name 50 more. And just here's shameless plug. Look at my blog on LinkedIn. I show pictures of me and tell little stories about each one of these places I go, just like I'm going to do for Fort Collins, Colorado tomorrow.
You talked about density and the energy that comes with density. And yet you also talked about the expanding space within the office that people are going to want. And there does seem to be a net down of the population. So we're going to lose some people. I remember predictions of 9 million people, and they were going to build housing for that. That was just a few years ago. Now, I don't know what exactly the population is right now, but it's not going to be as much as it was, let's say. But I just read that there's a push now, particularly with the construction going under Park Avenue, to bring the actual park back to the original size of Park Avenue, to reclaim 2 lanes on both sides of the park, along the avenue there. Is it, in your opinion, aesthetically and as an experience of living here, going to be better for us not to have as many people and yet still retain that energy, still retain the density that brings the excitement that makes our city so special?
Have you ever walked through Times Square when it's like really hopping?
Mm-hmm.
The energy, I mean, you almost can't move, right? There's something awesome about that, right? Now that's the tourist section of town. But who moved over there? Condé Nast moved there 20 years ago. Now they're not there. They moved to the World Trade Center now, but they moved there for that energy. There's something about that that is attractive to the office tenant. I'm not going to get into the aesthetics of having one lane more or less in Manhattan, but I will say this, is that the city still needs to work in terms of people getting around. And if they think they're going to take like a lane and turn it into a bike lane, what are you going to do if you can't ride a bike? You got to be in a cab or something. So I'm not confident they're going to take the, Manhattan at certainly below 96th Street and turn it into, bike central, because it will slow growth of people moving around town. But nevertheless, I would not be a strong advocate of de-densifying Manhattan. Its density is its strength. And you can quote me on that.
No, I agree with you. I think all the times that I've been to Washington, D.C. and all the plazas and everything, and the steps, everything that goes back, and that kills the energy, right? That's why.
You ever been to Bryant Park during lunchtime? Bryant Park?
Yeah, wonderful.
Of course you have. It's freaking awesome. And you know why it's awesome? It's not just because the Bryant Park Grill is there and they serve a pretty good Caesar salad there, because I've had it there. It's the people sitting on the benches. It's the people sitting in the park. And why do you think Bank of America stuck their tower right next to it? Because Bryant Park is awesome, and that they want to be near that energy.
Agreed. Agreed. I saw a term, workplace consultant, and that, again, from either from a podcast I listened to or from some of your materials. And I'm interested in knowing, is that a relatively, I mean, this is what CBRE does, I guess, but is it a burgeoning field? Is it something that, as people are going to be much more fluid in the types of industries that are moving around, the types of people that are moving around, the type of space that people are going to need, when they're going to need that space? Is that a relatively new field, and is it something that is going to continue to be on the ascent?
It is not a new field, and the field was founded the first time somebody rented space rather than bought space for themselves. Okay, so it's been around for hundreds of years. As a matter of fact, not to plug my alma mater, but I'm going to right now. I studied labor at the Cornell School of Industrial and Labor Relations. And the labor studies that they have there go back 100 years of people studying the optimal workplace for the outcome that you're seeking to achieve. So this is not a new field at all. As it transformed because of COVID, because of de-densification, because of the focus on wellness, because of the focus on ESG plus R, which we didn't even talk about. Sure it is. It's always been transforming, but not a new field. And it's something that certainly today, a lot of people look at it from the C-suite level that they haven't done it before, because the real estate was always something that was under finance or under HR when they want to think about people attracting and retaining talent. But no, real estate, when I speak to our clients, and I speak to the largest clients in the world every day, I say you should look at your real estate not as a cost center or an efficiency center. It is a productivity center. It is something that will drive your top line of your company if you do it right, but will don't save that extra dollar on cost because that could hurt your productivity. You should know that the average tenant nationally pays about 4% of their gross in real estate costs. Now, it is higher in Manhattan and San Francisco. It's a lot higher. It's closer to 8, 9, 10% in Manhattan or San Francisco. You say, oh, well, we can't afford that. Well, why do you pay that? You pay that for the productivity bang. And that is why you come to Manhattan. You come there for high productivity.
Yes, agreed. Agreed. Rini, I think we have another couple questions or another question.
Sorry. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I had a computer problem. So what are the demographics of the residential apartments in New York by age? Do you see an exodus out of the older folks as the young are coming in? Are the older kind of leaving because of taxes or other reasons?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm a lucky man. I'm married. I have 3 kids, a dog. I live in a beautiful suburban house. But the day that my kids are off to college is the day I move back into Manhattan. So it's not just a function of age, it's life stage. And the life stage is what matters. Where are the kids in school? Where do they go to school? How much space do they have? Those types of things. So yes, you are going to see a disproportionate number of younger folks in Manhattan. You know why? Because you always do. Because that's where young people out of college and MBA schools go. But what you will see is many of these empty nesters, like I will be, 7, 8 years from now, coming back too. But it's those people with the life stage that I talked about. That's where the trend accelerated to move into the suburbs.
Thank you. And there's one more question. It says, given the vast number of empty retail spaces all over the city, is it correct to infer that they must be owned by institutional investors looking to turn a fast profit? And if so, maybe we need a fewer of those landlords and more intergenerational family owners who are willing to lower the rents and retain their tenants and put some pressure on the city.
Well, look, it depends. There are plenty of new money folks that over leverage too. So it's not just institutions. It really comes down to your capital structure. And so if you paid $100 million for a block of buildings in Soho and you put $80 million of debt on it, you don't have that much flexibility in the rent you can charge your tenants. It's got to be at the high end of the range. But if you have low leverage, you've owned this building for a long time, you can meet the market. So it's not a question of institution versus intergenerational family. That's part of it, but it also has to do with the capital structure they put on the building.
I have one question, just kind of based on, again, we live Midtown East, and what we're seeing is a lot of these smaller, low-rise buildings kind of being packaged together to sell air rights, so that larger towers can go in. So it's changing the demographics of our neighborhood, maybe for the better, maybe for the worse, but we've seen a lot of warehousing going along as these packages are being put together. Is that something that you're seeing, or is it just unique to Midtown where we still have some low rises on the east side?
Well, look, there was a famous case, and it was the case of Grand Central Station. And Grand Central Station was it was designed and structurally designed to allow an office tower to go on top of it. Okay. And what happened? It was a fight against it, and it went to the Supreme Court, and they said, no, the city has the right to take your right to for your air rights. And that's when the big transferability of air rights began from building A to building B or building C, or accumulating them in order so that you can go vertical on a tower. So no, it's hardly unique to Manhattan, though it is most acute there because the real estate prices, the land prices are so high. But the transferability of air rights is something that happens everywhere. But look, I'm not going to get on my soapbox here, Renee or Kirk, but I am just going to be just point blank about this. Is that because there was a question about affordable housing here, it is the most human-made problem imaginable, because we could solve it tomorrow just by having more loose zoning laws on where you can go vertical.
Thanks. I have another question. Let me read this one. It's actually more of a statement and a question. After the Black Death, Europe's economy surged. In 1999, a three-story building on 8th Avenue and 15th Street sold for about $1.7 million. Today, it could sell for $12 million. That's a 10-time increase over 21 years. Do you see that same growth for residential buildings in New York?
Well, let's talk about the macroeconomy for a moment. So we are entering into with the exception of the next 18 months where we're going to have hyper growth in that 5 to 7% range, starting in 2023, we're going to be back to the lower growth economy, which is the 1.8 to 2% growth rate range. So are you going to see the same type of capital appreciation we saw over the last 20, 30 years? The short answer is probably not. But what you are going to see is reinvention. Just as I was talking about the meatpacking district or Brooklyn, you're going to find new places where people want to be in retail and office, multifamily and otherwise. So people who come to me say that the opportunities for the younger folks aren't the same today as they were for us back then, right? They're wrong. There's always opportunities, particularly in places like New York that are so dynamic, are always reinventing themselves to find places that have the highest and best use of their real estate. So I'm very bullish on the future, even beyond 2 years from now, when we revert to slower growth about New York because of many of the factors I talked about today, including in real estate. Will it go up tenfold like it did in the last 20 years? I can't tell you that. Probably not. But nevertheless, I'm still optimistic you're going to see some real capital appreciation.
And depending on the neighborhoods, right? I mean,
that's right.
There's an ebb and flow.
Neighborhoods will surprise you. They will surprise you because everybody thinks Midtown is the land of milk and honey. Well, guess what? 4 years ago, Midtown South passed Midtown in terms of the highest rents in Manhattan. Why? The tech boom, Google and otherwise. Midtown South was a sleepy little submarket in Manhattan. That was where all the B office buildings were, and then it passed Midtown. Why?
What do you define as Midtown South?
Midtown South is south of Grand Central Station. And they passed Midtown in terms of their average rents because New York reinvented itself.
Okay, back to you, Kirk. I don't have any additional questions right now.
Thank you, Rini. Thank you, Spencer, of course. What are people doing as far as moving around the city? People that are committed to the city but see opportunities, whether they're residents or commercial space. Is there any sort of people going for more space or smaller space, or what are the people that are committed to the city but are looking for a change? See this as an opportunity for a change. What are they doing?
Well, I hate to use this expression, but I think it's true. Follow the money. Where you see the fastest growing industries, particularly tech on the west side or life sciences and healthcare on the east side, you're going to see people moving closer to there because you can do business with them, whether you're a law firm, accounting firm, or the bagel shop downstairs. I mean, that's how it's going to work. And so that's where you're going to see people move out of the areas where you're seeing less growth and into the areas where there's more growth. That's the whole story of how Midtown South went from this sleepy little submarket to the highest rent in the city.
So if I understand correctly, tech, particularly big tech, is going to set up somewhere. And as a result of that, other ancillary businesses are going to follow and be in that area, boosting that area again. And then, if I again understand correctly, there's going to be some sort of residential following as well, perhaps. The restaurants like you were talking about.
Well, the restaurants for sure. Residential is a different story. And that's what I said before. And again, I hate getting on my soapbox for the fourth time on this episode.
Let's do it.
But I did on my weekly take. I had an episode on affordable housing 2 weeks ago. So you can listen to that and get more detail on this. But the point is the housing situation is a distortion caused by political choices.
You had said a while back in a television interview, year one was going to see the recovery of industrial and multifamily. Year two was going to be office. Year three was going to be hotels. I believe that was from about 6 months ago or so. What are your thoughts? Is your predictions going to hold on that, or have they adjusted?
Well, I'll tell you where I was right, and I'll tell you where I was wrong. You know where I was wrong? On industrial. I thought industrial would have a tough 2020 and start coming back in 21. Boy, was that wrong. Industrial had a bad 3 weeks and had the best year ever last year in 2020, when gangbusters in rents and land values and otherwise. Multifamily was a tale of two cities. It was those that were outside of the CBDs and those within. Within the CBDs got crushed last year, but they started to come back strong towards the end of the year. The big question mark is office. I mean, office right now, if you have a single tenant net leased office with a credit tenant, they're selling like hotcakes to primarily international investors. But if you have an office that's multi-tenanted with short-term WALTs, weighted average lease terms, that's where the question mark is, because banks are afraid to lend. You don't know how to underwrite your rents moving forward. So I think it's fair to say we probably pushed out our office comeback by a year or so, but that's in the major high density CBD markets. But markets like Charlotte and Raleigh and Tampa and Orlando, they're already coming back. So it's market dependent. New York is probably going to take a little bit longer to come back than we had originally thought because of their dependence upon mass transit in particular.
Right. Rini, anything else?
Yeah, this is a personal question for me, Spencer. So Jamie Dimon, who's pretty much, a leader in the financial markets and in the financial industry. And, we have quite a few investment banks that have their headquarters in Manhattan. I've worked for several of those investment banks, and I know how valuable Manhattan real estate is to them. And a lot of them, will have their offices, they're non front office facing, either in Jersey City or Long Island City or Connecticut. But I thought it was interesting that last week, Jamie Dimon, for the first time, said, for every 100 people, we're going to have seats for 60. Now, that hotel seating has always been part of investment banks, but it's never been part of the investment bank front office Manhattan view. Hoteling was usually out in Jersey City or in Long Island City. And with them building this new tower and consolidating their office space, will other investment banks or other financial institutions that have options now, like Plano, Texas, or Tampa, Florida, to put, some of their, again, non-front office facing, follow? Trading floors will always be in Manhattan, but what about,
The
technology?
back office.
Yeah, or even not back office. There's a lot of technology that supports the front office, right? So there's a lot of tech people that keep the trading floors up and running, and corporate offices and managing directors, et cetera. But that was interesting to me that that's the first time that I've heard a Manhattan investment bank saying we're going to hotel in Manhattan.
Well, look, Goldman Sachs moved some of their back office operations to Salt Lake City 10 years ago. And you see people, when I speak to my clients, they're not just talking about moving it to Salt Lake City. They're talking about Bogota, Colombia, in some cases. They're talking about places that are the most efficient places to put their non-client facing operations. Okay, and that's really what it comes down to. And so, yeah, you're going to see less dedicated seating, but you're going to see more open space, and there's going to be less density. And then I think that, even Jamie Dimon, who I have the world of respect for, Jamie Dimon, there's very, very few people I have more respect for. Even he's not going to know the full answer until we get back to what is deemed to be the new normal.
That's a good answer, right? I agree with that.
Okay,
Everybody's trying to figure it out. Thank you.
You bet.
we're done with the questions.
Let me check one more time. Yep, questions are done.
Okay, so I have one last one, and I just wish, Spencer, that you hadn't held back as much this hour.
By the way, you should see me when I'm on prime form. This is my 5th presentation today, and I'm like sucking down
a little
coffee.
punchy.
Going, a little punchy.
What, and really thank you for your time. And we have wanted all our guests to be just like you, to take the facts and figures and present them in a way that's going to make us think. So I've appreciated that very, very much tonight. What is the one thing that is the general consensus about New York real estate that is utterly wrong?
That it's dead.
Yeah.
It'll come back stronger than ever in a couple
I agree.
of years.
So,
you know why people are saying New York is dead? A lot of people want it to be dead.
Mhm.
And you know what? You gotta think with your own mind, look at history, look at the world cities like Paris, like Tokyo, like Berlin. New York is coming back, and it's going to come back stronger than ever. It just may take a little longer than people think.
in 3 to 5 years, we'll do this again, and we'll see where we are.
And we're going to have a $70 steak together.
I would love that.
Good.
I absolutely would love that very much. And you know what? If you don't want to be here, we don't want you here. We want to be with the people who want to be here and want to be a part of this city and what makes it so special. So
Amen, Kirk. I'm there with you, man.
We'll have you back. Spencer, thank you again. Just wanted to say, and Rini, thank you as well for taking the questions tonight. Next week, we will have Bita Mastofi, who is the commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, speaking to us. You can register for that at our website, thefutureofnewyork.com. One special thing that the mayor's office has asked for is that questions be posed in advance. So when you register, you'll get my email address. You'll be able to send those questions in advance. I'll be sending out an email about that as well. The city will survive, but it will never be the same.
It'll
Come
be
back
better.
next week. What's that? And what?
It'll be better.
And it will be better. We're gonna leave it on that. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks again, Spencer.
Bet.